My name is Elena Carter, and for most of my life I believed attention was proof of value. If people laughed when I spoke, if eyes followed me across a room, I felt validated. That belief shaped how I loved, how I talked, and how I measured myself against others. My husband, Mark, was never part of that performance. He didn't command rooms or dominate conversations. He observed, listened, and spoke only when something needed to be said. When we married, I told myself I had chosen stability over excitement, depth over flash. But somewhere inside me, I still needed to feel admired. That need became a quiet hunger I never named. We hosted dinners often, the kind where wine flowed freely and stories grew louder with every refill. Mark cooked. I entertained. It felt like balance. What I didn't see was how often my words landed like small cuts, how humor can bruise when it's built on comparison. That night, the night everything ended, started no differently. The table was full, the candles lit, the mood warm. I felt confident, charming, completely unaware that I was about to dismantle my marriage with nothing more than my voice. The conversation drifted naturally, the way it always did, toward relationships, careers, the past. Someone mentioned old flames, harmless nostalgia shared over dessert. That was my opening. I laughed and brought up my ex, Daniel, the way I had before, but this time with sharper edges and more detail. I talked about his ambition, his money, the trips, the intensity. I framed it like a joke, exaggerated just enough to sound playful. People laughed. I laughed harder. I could feel the room lean toward me, exactly the way I liked. Then I made the mistake of turning the story into a comparison. Mark is the calm after the storm, I said, smiling, but Daniel was definitely the storm. More laughter. I reached for Mark's hand like punctuation, as if that softened the blow. He smiled politely, but his eyes didn't meet mine. I noticed it, but brushed it aside. I told myself I was being entertaining, that Mark understood my humor. I didn't realize that every word was rewriting our history in public, reducing his love to an afterthought while I glorified someone who no longer mattered. Once I started, I couldn't stop. The stories flowed more freely with each sip of wine. I teased Mark lightly, framed him as the sensible choice after a wild past. I thought humility made him look noble. I thought honesty made me interesting. What I didn't see was how humiliation hides easily behind laughter. Someone joked that Mark must feel lucky to have won in the end. I laughed and said, "Oh, he knows." That was when Mark finally looked at me fully. Not with anger, not with jealousy, with distance. It unsettled me. I'd seen him tired, stressed, even disappointed before, but never detached. He didn't interrupt, didn't defend himself, didn't challenge me. He simply listened, as he always did. But something in him was closing, folding inward with quiet precision. I mistook his silence for patience. I mistook restraint for weakness. I kept talking, convinced I was in control of the room, unaware that control was slipping from me entirely. By the time I finished my last joke, the room was still laughing. Mark wasn't. He stood slowly, the chair scraping softly against the floor. The sound cut through the noise like a signal. Conversation faltered. I expected him to excuse himself, maybe step outside, maybe smile and shake it off later. Instead, he straightened his jacket and looked directly at me. The expression on his face wasn't dramatic. It was calm, composed, almost gentle. That frightened me more than anger ever could. "I hope he was worth it," he said quietly. No accusation. No raised voice. Just that sentence, spoken evenly, as if he had already processed everything I hadn't. I laughed reflexively, assuming this was part of the moment. "Mark, don't be sensitive," I said. He didn't respond. He turned and walked toward the door. The room was silent now. No one followed him. No one spoke. I waited for him to come back. He didn't. The door closed, not slammed, just closed. In that instant, the performance ended. I stood there, wine glass in hand, realizing too late that I hadn't embarrassed my husband. I had dismissed him. And dismissal, I would learn, is irreversible. The guests left quickly after that. Awkward hugs, murmured excuses, eyes that wouldn't meet mine. Vanessa lingered long enough to say, "You shouldn't have done that," before leaving too. When the house finally emptied, the silence felt louder than the laughter had been. I called Mark's phone, expecting annoyance, maybe a sigh. It went to voicemail. I texted. Nothing. I told myself he needed space. An hour passed. Then 2. Midnight came and went. I checked his location, his office, his brother's place. No sign of him. When I returned home, I noticed his coat was gone. One pair of shoes missing. The realization settled slowly, heavily. This wasn't a break. It was a decision. In the morning, his side of the closet was noticeably lighter. Not empty, but curated. Only what mattered to him was gone. On the kitchen counter sat an envelope with my name written in his handwriting. Inside was a single page. No anger, no blame. Just clarity. He wrote that he refused to live in comparison, that love required respect, and that he was choosing himself. I read it 3 times before I understood. He wasn't asking me to change. He was leaving. I spent days replaying that dinner, dissecting every sentence, every laugh. I told myself I hadn't meant it. That intention should matter. But intention doesn't erase impact. Mark had spent years building a life with me quietly, consistently, without spectacle. I had repaid that by turning him into a footnote for entertainment. When the divorce papers arrived weeks later, they were as calm as he was. Fair. Clean. No drama. No demands. I wanted to fight them, not for the marriage, but for the comfort of familiarity. We met once, briefly, to finalize details. He looked different. Lighter. Not happier, but resolved. I apologized then, finally. He listened, nodded, thanked me for saying it. He didn't forgive me. He didn't need to. Forgiveness, I realized, is not owed simply because regret exists. When we parted, he wished me well, genuinely. That hurt more than anger ever could. He had already grieved the marriage. I was just beginning. After he left, the house felt staged, like a set without its lead actor. The dinners stopped. The laughter faded. Friends visited less often. Without Mark's quiet presence grounding everything, I noticed how hollow my performances felt. People still laughed, but it rang differently. I began to understand that admiration without respect is fleeting. Mark had respected me even when I didn't deserve it. I had mistaken his patience for permanence. Therapy helped, but it couldn't undo the truth. I had loved being chosen more than I loved choosing back. I thought love was excitement sustained by comparison. Mark had believed love was commitment sustained by dignity. That difference had always been there. I just ignored it. Sometimes I imagine going back to that table, choosing silence instead of humor, humility instead of ego. But life doesn't rewind for realizations. It only teaches through consequence. People ask what happened between us. I say we grew apart. It's easier than explaining how cruelty can wear a smile. I don't mention Daniel anymore. Not because Mark asked me not to, but because I finally understand how irrelevant he always was. The real loss wasn't the marriage itself. It was losing someone who loved me without needing to prove anything. Mark never tried to outshine my past. He tried to build a future. I was too busy curating moments to notice. Some nights I sit alone at that same table, the candles unlit, the room quiet, and I wonder if silence would have saved us. Maybe. Or maybe the marriage ended exactly when it was meant to, the moment I showed him who I was when applause mattered more than partnership. Mark never came back. He didn't check in. He didn't hover. He disappeared from my daily life with the same grace he had shown while in it. That's what stays with me. Not the words he said, but the restraint. He didn't need revenge or public vindication. He let my own actions tell the story. I learned that dignity doesn't announce itself. It leaves quietly. That lesson cost me everything that mattered. I still host dinners occasionally, but I speak less now. I listen more. Not because I'm wiser, but because I know how quickly words can destroy what silence protects. I once believed the loudest voice held the most power. Now I know the most powerful person in the room is the one who knows when to stand, look once, and walk away. Mark taught me that without trying. I wish I had learned it sooner. If there's a moral here, it's not about infidelity or jealousy. It's about respect. Love doesn't survive ridicule, even when it's disguised as humor. And once respect dies publicly, it rarely resurrects privately. I lost a man who loved me deeply because I wanted to feel impressive to people who didn't matter. That is a mistake no apology can undo. And it is one I will carry quietly for the rest of my life.